Hi, I'm Haley Piper, and I'm going to talk about writing queer in horror. So, something that happens when someone finds out I write, well, they want to see it or they want to talk about it, and they'll assume off the bat that I write queer romance or just kind of what LGBTQ plus has become as far as a genre in publishing is concerned, just about the coming out experience. And it's much more than that, of course, but when they find out I write horror, their kind of face does a thing. Yes, I write horror stories. I write stories about horrible monsters and that kind of stuff. But also it's horror, I think, is a misunderstood genre. It's also about depression. It's about trauma. It's about finding strength too. It's a complicated genre. In my opinion, it's the most honest genre. The writer definitely has to dig deep inside into uncomfortable places within themselves and bring it out for the reader. Why do I write horror, though, when I also want to write queer fiction? Isn't that uncomfortable? We've got a lot of, tropes that are not suited for us. As queer people, we're often not treated well by horror as a genre, but I would say that's true of a lot of genres over the past existence in media, and in real life, of course. I think that's part of why I write horror, is because a lot of us have lived horror stories. Just being queer in a heteronormative, cisnormative society. We know monsters. Sometimes we have family members who are monsters, and I think it's important that we see the strength to face that, maybe. And sometimes it's a matter of how we don't win or how we combat the monsters inside ourselves, because we can be our worst critics sometimes. Maybe we can turn off the phone and, stay inside, stay away from everybody, and still have something eating at us inside. So, going back to horror being the honest genre means sometimes being honest with myself and looking at how am I being towards me. Part of that struggle is just letting the work be queer in the first place. My first novella, I didn't really have experience with what publishing was like, what the climate was like for things. As far as readers were concerned, I wasn't sure if anybody wanted to read queer characters in horror. I wasn't seeing much of that in what I was reading. I wasn't seeing much of it in horror movies, which I love. So I wasn't sure how much of that I should be introducing when I had no ground gained. So although when I first wrote the novella, it involved elements of the protagonist's home life, when I revised it, I ended up removing a lot of that stuff, and it's sad in retrospect. I wonder what that would have looked like in the end. At this point, there's only one paragraph that references that she has a same-sex partner at home. I've definitely been bolder in my short fiction. I would say the shorter I've written, the gayer it is. My second standalone title, An Invitation to Darkness, just was straight out about a lesbian relationship in the 1800s, but it's also a gothic story with monsters and ghosts and things like that. In short fiction, it's even shorter, just right down to flash stories, just completely focusing on queer elements in body horror, in post-apocalyptic situations, just the discomforting situations we get into sometimes, public restrooms and peer expectations. And I think that in short fiction there's been a bit more of a freedom to dealing with those things, because it's just a snapshot. It's a short narrative that people can kind of go in without knowing what they're going to expect. You don't usually get a summary for a short story. and come out of it maybe knowing the queer experience just a teensy bit better, or having something opened up inside them that wasn't open before, just to understand a little better. As far as reader reception, though, it's been honestly very positive. I think that readers are ready for this type of fiction. I think they are wanting new stories, new experiences, things that they haven't been offered before, or at least not as much of. So I think people are receptive to seeing gay characters, to connecting and relating to them, to narratives that may not be what they're used to in general. And as a queer reader myself, I'm definitely looking for that stuff. I want that stuff. I want to read that stuff. We're hungry for representation. It's not just about people outside the queer community who are like, oh, I want something new. It's about us wanting to see ourselves and just be able to enjoy that and be like, yeah, this person's like me, or at least a little more like me than some other protagonist might be, or some other situation, or maybe dealing with something like I'm dealing with that a lot of other people aren't. Much like a lot of us hopefully be able to come out of the closet at different points to different people, doing that in my fiction was significant. If horror is the most honest genre to me, then how could I write it if I wasn't being honest within it? And so it's been a matter of fighting that internal doubt and letting the queerness onto the page in characters and themes and stories involving characters. You can have a plot that has nothing to do with queer stuff, but the character is, or it can involve their queer stuff, and sometimes that means digging out uncomfortable things, the kinds of conversations that queer people have between each other in the LGBTQIA community don't necessarily get out there easily. There are nuances that I think we are specially equipped to handle because we know ourselves and we know each other. Sometimes that makes it difficult just to get onto a page that's in front of people. I have received feedback in the past where there are blockades to, like, does this need to be gay? Does this need to be queer? Does this need to be like this? Couldn't a straight character have this same story? And it's like, well, maybe, but the fact is that in the past we've been portrayed as the monsters in common media, in general media, and people need to see us as people. Things are obviously getting better, but as a recent Netflix documentary, Disclosure, pointed out, a lot of people don't know trans people, or at least that they think they don't, and what they understand is what they see. And I think it's important that queer creatives make sure that they're seeing something that's legitimate. So I do that in horror of all genres. I know other queer creatives who are more, they go for fantasy and sci-fi, and I love that stuff. I love reading it, and sometimes I love writing it. I end up mixing it with horror a lot of the time, but for me this is what feels true, and it's definitely a genre where we're underrepresented, and I want to change that. And I want horror fans to see us. I want queer horror fans to see themselves. And I'm definitely not alone in this endeavor, and that's good too. And I genuinely think things are changing for the better. We just got to keep working on it.